everyone, welcome back, and today I have for you a new guest. This is Cuddle, Cuddle Puss. She's about 6 years old and she came to us from Russia. She's a Himalayan cat, and she's the mother of all my cats. I used to have a lot, so now we are down to just 3. So this is Cuddle Puss, and she's going to be joining us today for our session or our story. And the story is called The Story of Matthew Potter. So let's listen to Matthew Potter. I think Cuddle is more interested in getting petted than listening to the story, but we can start soon. I hope you like animals. Once in a village at the edge of the moor, there lived a potter. The name of the village was Budley on the Edge, usually called simply the Edge. Whether on the edge of a moor or the edge of Elfland, no one seemed to know, and it doesn't matter much. It probably means both. The name of Potter was Matthew Reed, but he was not the only Matthew in the village, so everyone called him Matthew Potter. And the other Matthew was Matthew Cobbler. He doesn't come into this story. For years, Matthew Potter had lived with his sister Sarah in his cottage at the end of the village, till suddenly one day she said, "Matthew, I should like to see London town." And so saying, she packed her trunk and went, and Matthew went on living by himself, happy in his craft. Now Matthew was not an ordinary potter. Far from it, he was a master. He had not lived all these years at the edge without learning much that town folk would have called nonsense and country folk would have called wisdom, and that Matthew himself called elfin knowledge. And all this store of learning he put into the making of his pots. And nowhere in the world would you find pots of such shapes, such colors, such beauty as Matthew's, for he got his ideas from the moor. He had worked hard all his life, and many were the people who had watched him working at his potter's wheel and who had stopped to pass the time of day with him. In one half of his house he made his pots and set them out in the window. In the other half he lived. By the time Matthew was 60 years old, he had made enough money and to spare. So he stopped making pots for sale and he began making the pots he had always dreamt of making. And this was to be no ordinary pot. Day after day he spent on the moor, watching, listening, thinking, and the village people, seeing his shop shut, his wheel growing dusty from want of use, thought he had gone crazy, out dreaming on the moor all day, as they said. But Matthew was not dreaming. He was busier than he'd ever been, and at last he found the place on the moor where the exactly right clay was to be found, and he brought some home. One day Matthew was to be seen every day working. Once again, Matthew was to be seen every day working at his wheel. The people of the village sighed with relief, but his stock of pots did not grow, for no sooner had he finished making a pot than he destroyed it and began again. After many days of work, he made a pot which pleased him. Even his critical eye could discover no flaw. It was perfect. And now there was the coloring. It took Matthew a year of experimenting and testing to get this as he wanted. Spring passed, and summer and winter, and when spring came again, the pot was finished, and Matthew was satisfied that it was the most beautiful and strangest pot on earth, and in this lay the strangeness. It could change color, not because of the light or shade, but because of the atmosphere in the room. In a room where the people were sad or dull, the pot was a dingy grey. In a room where everyone was joyful, the pot was happy color, such as blue or green. But in a room where there was perfect peace and happiness, the pot would become the color of pure gold. And this last Matthew was unable to prove, for nowhere in the village could he find perfect happiness, not even in his own house, for he was lonely. So he stood it on the shelf in his kitchen window. One day in April there came to the edge a girl and a boy, brother and sister. They were town children and had been sent into the country for the moor air. They stayed for a month and they became pretty friendly with Matthew Potter. They used to explore the moor with him and listen to his stories, and sometimes he allowed them to try to make pots on his wheel. At last their visit was over, and it was time to go back to London and to school. Their last evening at the edge they spent with Matthew, and before they went they said, "I'd like to give you something." He said, "Will you choose one of my pots?" The children were delighted, and after looking for a few minutes at the pots in his shop, the girl said, "May we have the beautiful grey pot which stands on your kitchen windowsill?" Matthew felt a clutching at his heart. Why must they choose that one, his perfect piece of work? But he was glad that they had noticed its quiet beauty rather than one of the gaily colored pots. "You may have it," he said gently. "It's my best." They knew from his voice that it was something precious they were taking from him, and they were solemn and thoughtful as they carried it home. Back in London again, they unwrapped the pot and set it in the window of the schoolroom. The moor seemed very far off, and the city very near. "I wonder if Matthew is thinking of us," said the girl, as she said good night. "I expect he's out in the moor," answered the boy. "It will be beautiful there tonight, and the gorse in full bloom, and the harebells and thyme." Next morning there was school and packing of satchels and filling of shoe bags, and just before breakfast the girl ran into the schoolroom to collect her books, and she saw the pot. She hesitated, blinked, called the boy. "Look at our pot," she cried. It was palely green and flecked with gold. "How strange! We should think it grey," he said. "It must have been the dim light." "No," the girl shook her head. "I know it was grey last night," she said. They both laughed unbelievingly and hurried off to school. 4 years passed, times changed, and the children were told they were going to boarding school, and the house was to be sold. You'll stay with different relations in the holidays, they were told, and when you are grown up, you'll join us in India. The girl and boy were sad. What was to happen to all their treasures if they had no place of their own? What about our pot? They said to one another. We shan't be together any more, for they knew now how the pot changed color with their moods, though they could never hope to understand why. Let's give it to old Nanny when we go to say goodbye to her, the girl suggested. Yes, said the boy, she would like something of ours to keep. Old Nanny was not their old nurse. She had been their cousin's nurse, and a year ago she had left them, since they were now grown up, and they had come to live in an attic, room quite near the children's home, and they often went to see her. The furniture was sold, the house was dismantled, and the last day in London came. Next morning, the children were being sent to their boarding schools. In the afternoon, they wrapped their pot in brown paper and went to say goodbye to old Nanny. They climbed the stairs and knocked at the door 3 flats up, and the name on the knocker said, Miss Sarah Reed. Old Nanny came to the door and, Come in, my dearies, she cried when she saw the children. We've brought you a goodbye present, said the girl, and the boy thrust the parcel into Nanny's hand. She unwrapped the pot and looked at it in silence for a minute. Then she said, It is a beautiful present, thank you. I shall keep my savings in it. And she pulled an old stocking from under her mattress and emptied some coppers and silver coins into the pot. And as she set it on the mantelpiece, the color was a warm rose speckled with gold. Winter wore away slowly in the city, and Sarah was weary of grayness. When at last one day blue sky showed, Spring in London is more than I can bear, said Sarah. There is only one place on earth where I can spend April, and that is the Edge. If only I had enough money, I'd go home. She sighed deeply, for she knew that her savings were not enough to take her to Devonshire. But she took down the pot and counted them over. What was this? Her hand trembled as she shook on the table not 7 pieces of copper and silver, but 7 pieces of gold. Bless me, it's magic, gasped Sarah. I'll pack and go this very day. So you're home again, Sister Sarah, said Matthew Potter. 'Tis a long visit you've paid to London town, but it's good to have you home. They sat at the window in Matthew's cottage, and on the sill before them stood Matthew's pot, pure gold all over. I hope you liked that one. That was a very, very happy story. Unfortunately, Cuddle got bored and she walked out of the room. So she's not here to say goodbye, but I'm sure she'll join us another day. So enjoy yourselves, have fun, and join us again for another story tomorrow. Bye bye.